everyone, and welcome back to Dragalia Foundry, a fan channel where everything Dragalia Lost can be found. This video is going to be all about the various events that ran in Dragalia Lost over the past 4 years. I wanted to release this now as we are now within the final 5 days of Dragalia Lost before its end of service, so I felt like this was the right time to reflect and have a bit of a retrospective on lots of different aspects of the game. Expect a few more videos before the end of service next week. As for this video, like I said, all about the different special events that have run throughout Dragalia Lost, and specifically I'll be presenting and talking about 10 of my favorite events. And I wanted to focus in on what I liked and also a selection of events that I think really summarize some of the things that Dragalia Lost did well over the years, and events that introduced new exciting mechanics or elements or did something that was very original. That's what I tried to prioritize in this top 10 list. I also wanted to, at least a little bit, highlight the breadth of events that ran in Dragalia Lost over the years. I think that one thing that's really special about Dragalia Lost is there are all sorts of types of content housed within its basic gameplay structure. Even within the permanent content in the game, we had things like raid battles, we had regular boss battles, we had a roguelike dungeon crawling mode eventually, we had a campaign, we had stories to read, we had a battle royale mode that was added to some players' chagrin, to be fair. But I think there was such a nice variety, and that also applied to the special events that were not available on a permanent basis. Some of them were added to an event compendium, you can see the logo for it there, to be made available permanently. But otherwise, these special events were a moment in Dragalia Lost's life when they first made their debut that was really exciting and gave the player base something to collectively focus their efforts on and engage themselves with. So that's why I think the events in Dragalia Lost are actually a huge part of what made it such a fun game. On this first screen, the thumbnail here, I wanted to show a couple that will not make my top 10 list, but I think were unique and therefore warrant mention. First up, Not Slumber Shot. This ran for April Fools. It was our first April Fools event, and it's basically a shmup within Dragalia Lost, available only for April Fools, and it subsequently reran one time and never returned thereafter. It was actually very, very fun. You played as Not in this shoot 'em up, and yeah, that's a really cool type of event that unfortunately was never expanded upon. An event that I was less fond of, although admittedly there were moments that I really enjoyed the theory crafting around, was the time attack challenges. Not to be confused with the original time attack rankings that were pretty maligned by a lot of the player base when the Advanced Dragon Trials released, the expert and master difficulty of those trials released. But the time attack challenges that followed that focused on the Yagito, the Sinister Dominion bosses, I actually think that those were pretty fun to take on and theory craft with other players on, and there was a less competitive focus to those. Everybody could achieve the basic rewards from those events, and they could work together to achieve those. And as far as the competitive aspect, it was really just for bragging rights and having a specific in-game title. So let's move on now, first up to some honorable mentions, and then we'll get into the top 10. Starting with the honorable mentions, well, I want to highlight here the crossover or collab events that Dragalia Lost had. And the reason I didn't include these in my top 10 is, one, I mean, these are really awesome, so I didn't want half the top 10 to just be all these events. But two, I wanted to focus on the events that are really original to Dragalia Lost and primarily feature its characters. So those are the reasons why I decided to leave these off of the top 10 list. But I do want to at least mention a couple things about each of these because I think they all excelled in different ways. So starting on the left there, Fire Emblem Lost Heroes. This was our first collab event. That event introduced defensive battles, and at the time, it felt like a genuinely revolutionary gameplay mode for Dragalia Lost. It was really fun, you could do it in co-op play. Even though there were a limited number of maps, it actually still felt pretty good as a different kind of content than what we had had in the past. Eventually, we got so many defensive battle events with the same maps that it started to be a less satisfying mode, but I think at the time, the novelty of that and the connection to Fire Emblem, that was a huge event for Dragalia Lost. I think that was really instrumental to its success in the first year. So the second Fire Emblem event, Kindred Ties, well, it kind of iterated upon the first with a new map, a few new mechanics in the defensive battles. That was not necessarily the original aspect to it. I think that what actually made it super cool was the Colosseum mode. We only got one other Colosseum event besides that Fire Emblem Kindred Ties Colosseum mode that was housed within, and that was a mode where you played through waves, but you're actually battling characters who are playable, adventurers, dragons that are playable in the game, and they were controlled by AI, so it's not like you were doing any kind of PvP, but it felt like a very fresh challenge. There were challenges for every element, and well, each of them had different floors and different kind of problems that they confronted you with that you had to build your team around or learn the mechanics of to be able to clear. So I just thought that was really fun. Moving on to Mega Man Chaos Protocol, I think this is a very underrated collab event. I actually look back on this kind of fondly. At the time, one of my criticisms of it was that there really wasn't a story, and I thought that would be kind of nice. I actually look back and think that maybe that would have just been a little bit of bloat for this event, and it really doesn't need a story. It's actually got some very cool and unique, never repeated boss battles that feel like Mega Man boss battles. I wish I could go back and play some of those against the Great Worms because I think they were really cool. And moreover, we all got Mega Man as a free playable character. And yes, in the other events, we got Alphonse and Sharina respectively, but Mega Man plays like no other character in Dragalia Lost. And to this day, if you're clearing content with Mega Man, it's basically like you're playing a different game. It's almost a Sakurai-esque implementation of this character into this franchise that still plays like how it was in its original game, which I think is very cool. Moving on to another Capcom crossover, Monster Hunter Primal Crisis. This was a very, very sweet event too. This one focusing more on traditional raid battle content, but in a way that I think fit with the world of Monster Hunter. For me, what I found most cool about this event was just the fact that we got alts. I know that that's kind of silly, but to see Dragalia Lost characters in Monster Hunter armor, that was very satisfying. Even on the worm prints, the gorgeous artwork of some of those worm prints, seeing your favorite characters in another world's aesthetics was really cool to me. And I also like the battles against Rathalos, multiple Rathalos, and against Fatalis in the raid battle. There was a barrel bomb mechanic that was in this raid battle as well. So I think that it was really just well implemented. It was very fun. The raid battle is one of the most accessible and recurring popular type of events in Dragalia Lost, so we're going to see a lot once we get past these honorable mentions. Moving on to Cage Desire, this took largely the same format. Of course, this was our Persona 5 Strikers crossover. We got a free character, Sophie, and we were able to summon for Joker, for Panther, and for Arsene. It was a very, very exciting crossover in my opinion, and the thing that I really liked about this one was actually the implementation of story elements. So, like I said, Mega Man didn't necessarily need it. With Persona, we got an opportunity to explore Emil, and it really paralleled the Persona series nicely, and Persona 5 specifically, going into Emil's mind and trying to foster a change of heart, which in some ways he eventually realized within the franchise. But the absolute thing that I love the most about this was how you are dropped into the event in media res, very reminiscent of Persona 5 itself, and you're just playing as Joker. And even if you didn't summon Joker and didn't get him through the gacha, you actually got an opportunity to play as Joker and try out his moves, and just such a cool way of introducing the event. So I really like that one too. And finally, if you don't count Rage of Kronos, which featured some other Cygames characters like Grimnir and Vania, If you don't count that one, our last collab was Princess Connect Redive, another Cygames collab. It was called A Voracious Visitor, and this one featured Pecorine, it featured Forager Cleo, Forager Mitsuba. Very, very wholesome event. Again, I like the fact that we got alts and new costumes. One of the things that I thought was really cool about this event too was that Pecorine had some unique animations. Although she was a gacha character, so you had to summon for her. You did get Forager Cleo for free during the event. Not the most original event as far as the raid boss goes, because it was kind of a reskin of an existing raid boss, but they did actually change the attack patterns in pretty cool ways. There were some animated scenes in the event as well in the storyline. Overall, just very, very wholesome vibes. I would have loved to see another Princess Connect event to get some of the side characters besides Pecorine, but that was a really fun one. Okay, we've finally gotten through the honorable mentions, so now we're going to count down the top 10. First up, at number 10, The Blood That Binds. On all of these, I'm going to show the event banner image on the left and then the preview text on the right. This preview text is what appeared in-game to allude to this event coming out soon. So, for instance, for The Blood That Binds, and I'll read through all of these, fiends corrupted by black mana have begun a coordinated assault on the major cities. Sensing someone is leading them, my brother Leonidas gathered us all together to face the invasion. But then, someone incredible appeared on the scene. Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, The Blood That Binds. Today, the siblings of Alberia prove our mettle. So I have this on here for a couple of reasons. One, I think this is maybe the best representation of the invasion events. That was a later event type in Dragalia Lost Life. One of the cool things about the invasion events is, unlike the raid battles where you're battling against one boss, invasion events are really focused on the count of enemies you're able to defeat. Now that can kind of make your device chug, so I would say these are not one of the best kinds of events in Dragalia Lost, not one of the most popular, but not as far down as maybe like the story events or the basic events like the cleaning events, for example. So I think they're like okay, not quite up to a raid level, but the thing I really liked about this one as a representation of them is that they introduced and kind of had fun theming around like a rivalry, or like the story would reach a point where two characters that we like are sort of at odds and fighting against each other. And so in this case, Ferris and Valix had different approaches to something, but they ultimately ended up working together. And moreover, the reason I like this event specifically, we did get Ferris and Valix summonable at the time, which might have been a harbinger that Dragalia Lost was not long for this world in retrospect, because to release both of these characters who we've known about since the beginning of the game at once and in the final days, it kind of makes sense looking back. But I like this event because it specifically focused on the Alberian royal siblings. And even though those are characters we've had since the beginning of the game, we hadn't really had an event that brought all of them together in this way. We did have stranded scions that did a good job with Chell, Leonidas, Yuden, and Emil, but the other siblings, Valix and Ferris, and even the other siblings besides them, so like if you want to talk about Zethia, I guess not really Darren, but you get the idea. This really was a pretty good event at bringing all these characters together. That's why I like it. And also a pretty cool boss battle against Alberius. So Alberius is the mysterious stranger that shows up in this event, one of the characters famous in Dragalia Lost lore, after which the world, or at least the country of Alberia, is named. So overall, I think this is our best invasion event we got. That's why I have it at number 10. Moving on to number 9, Elementary Escapades. This was an Onslaught event. Onslaught event types were a very simple event where the main kind of battle, the main thing that was special to them was Dragon Battle. It was a battle where you start off transformed and you battle against multiple enemies or just bosses at times, some endgame bosses in their astral form as a dragon. So that's kind of the gimmick. It's not a very special kind of event, in my opinion, but what could make it special at times was the reduced form story that these events, as well as defensive battle events in later days, had. They had a very snappy story that you would unlock with War Chronicles. Some of them veered into serious territory, were emotional, would pull at your heartstrings. Other ones were absurd, humorous, crazy. So this is one of the latter, and I think that the reason this is such a good event is that it demonstrates Dragalia Lost was capable of simultaneously dealing with very heavy subject matter, serious lore, world-ending calamities and tragedies, and at the same time, you could just have some ridiculous, hilarious moments as well. And this Elementary Escapades, let me read the description and you'll get the idea. So first of all, ahahaha! Behold, I have created a school of my own, run by me and focused purely on extolling my grandeur. Eh? Come again? Someone had the gall to sneak into my palace of edification? From the Halidom? Ah, of course they are. Hold a moment. Those two children look oddly familiar. Why, it's that muscle-bound oaf and the protective sister. They just became children? They can do that? Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Elementary Escapades. Class is in session, so don't be tardy. Alright, I did my best at Emil there. You know I'm not the best voice talent in the world, but this event was focused on Emil running a school, and Ronzel and Luis are transformed into child form, and Mercury is trying to teach Emil a lesson. She has them infiltrate the school. They're trying to figure out whether he's up to no good. It just explores Emil's character in a very funny way. There's moments that are funny with Luis and a particularly precocious youth who is jealous of Ronzel, I think, at certain points. There's just a lot in this one, and I think it's really fun. So yeah, Elementary Escapades, had to put it on this list for the humor that it represents. Okay, moving on to number 8, Dream Big Under the Big Top. Ladies and gentlemen, prepare for a magical circus unlike any you've seen before. Your hosts on this dreamlike adventure, a gifted dagger wielder and a lovely dragon tamer. Wait until you see the show they've prepared for you. Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Dream Big Under the Big Top. The lights are about to go down, don't miss it. So this event is an interesting one. This one for me, it's not necessarily here for the story, although there are some diehard Fritz and Annalie fans out there. I doubt there are diehard Liger fans, but hey, you never know. That's the dragon associated with this event. But the reason that it's here for me is I wanted to represent facility events, as they were one of the first 2 types of events in Dragalia Lost, and for many years, at least a couple years, they alternated with raid events as our primary form of special released content. And specifically, these facility events filled a niche, unlike the raid events, in that they were focused on solo content and solo gameplay. In these facility events, you would farm up resources to level up a facility in your Halidom, and that was a big deal to raise the stats of your adventurers with a certain characteristic. So for instance, adventurers of a certain element, or later on, adventurers with a certain weapon type would get bonuses by leveling up these facilities. So that was already a pretty big reward, and also you would get worm prints from these events, which were a good option back when worm prints were part of the gacha. Some of these free worm prints were quite strong. So those are some of the merits of facility events, and I think they became obsolete over time, or just less fun over time, in part because they no longer really posed a solo challenge. They just weren't as satisfying, although they were easier to farm out and you could get all the rewards and it wouldn't really pose much of an issue for you. I think back in the day, it was genuinely pretty fun, blah, tongue-tied there, to get these events because they would push back against the player. And this is the event that I think is most emblematic of that, because this event had a challenge battle in it called Top Star Trial, which was a solo challenge, And by completing this, you could get a special epithet. And I remember this being like one of the first very difficult challenges for players. If you had that special epithet, it was a big deal. It was like, wow, you managed to clear this. And I tried so many times to clear that challenge and was finally able to do so, and like immediately went to upload my video of how I did it with my relatively budget team at the time. And so that's really why I wanted to highlight this event. I just think that it has a special place in my memory for that reason. It's a representation of days gone by of facility events when they were pretty fun. Eventually, all facility events were added to the event compendium so that all players, regardless of when they started playing the game, could get access to those stat bonuses that were key rewards from these events. So I also kind of associate Dream Big Under the Big Top a little bit with the event compendium, in part because at the time I made a facility event guide. I think this was the event that I used to make my guide on how to grind out the facility events and get all of the rewards. Okay, let's go ahead and move on though to number 7 on our list, and that's going to be a raid event, Loyalty's Requiem. So this is the first raid event on this list, the top 10 at least. We had some in the honorable mentions, and frankly, I think the raid event is just the quintessential best kind of event in Dragalia Lost. So a little bit of a spoiler, but I'll tell you now, all the other events on this list are going to be raid events. There's just something very satisfying about teaming up with other players, each of you getting to bring 4 characters of your choice for a total of 16 adventurers in the arena against a larger-than-life raid boss. I think that Loyalty's Requiem, which was the very first event and first raid in the game, is emblematic of what made these events so fun. Whether you were playing with complete strangers or if you were on a Discord, chat, or call, these were very satisfying to take on, and again, particularly during that era where they dared to push back against the player base, and you needed to be prepared for a challenge with these. They, although, in later days became much more farmable, in the early days, these were not easy to just repeatedly clear, and it was genuinely fun to play and replay the content and help others, and there was a sense of challenge. So that's why I picked Loyalty's Requiem. Again, one that I would say the story, not necessarily a huge standout in my mind, but I do think there are some very fun comedic moments with Knot and Celiera being kind of our first event welfare character, became a very big fan favorite. So I think those are 2 big triumphs of the story. I'll read the event preview pane there. The prince and his companions arrive at a volcano to slay the fiends there, but instead find themselves caught up in a battle for the fate of the world. With the help of a passionate instructor and a devoted dragon, can they halt a deadly fiend's revival before it's too late? Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Loyalty's Requiem. The fate of the world is in your hands. So the other thing that I have to mention with this event, I think, is just at a basic level, Fraganoth, the raid boss, who we mustn't let be revived, by the way, I think he is just an excellently designed raid boss. I think that he's actually one of the most mechanically sound that holds up to this day and can still be satisfying to play in like Astral Raids content, if only he had, HP scaled to match our current level of gear. There's a weak point to the boss in the tail. There are lots of different kinds of hitboxes that actually playing the fight and practicing it helps you to be able to avoid. There are vulnerable points across the map with a countdown to destroy them in the form of the volcanoes that Fraganoth summons. I just think that there's a lot of really good design ideas that manifested themselves early that weren't necessarily seen in every subsequent raid for the next year or so. They're pretty unique ideas, that volcano one especially, I think, being pretty satisfying to play around with. And of course, I also have to mention the Volcanic Fiend Slayer epithet, the epithet tied to this event, clearing within a certain time limit. It was one that I barely got with the help of the community, and so that's always going to be a special memory for me. So let's move on to the next event on our list, Resplendent Refrain, another raid event, another one pretty early on in the game's life. This is going to be number 6 on the list, and I wanted to pick this one because just how I had elementary escapades that focused on the lighter side of Dragalia Lost, I think this was the first event that made me realize Dragalia Lost could handle heavier subject matter and do so in a very poignant way. So this event focused on the character Elias and the Harmonia Choir, and Elias battling some inner demons and feeling unsure of himself and his voice as a singer, in part because he was growing up, his voice was starting to change, and he was just going through that, emergent adulthood that we all have been through, or all maybe going through, and a lot changes in your life, and so there's some somberness to this event, and I think punctuated by the music in this event, which is also really special. This was our first event that kind of had original music. We did have some special tracks for Trick or Treasure, like a special Halloween track and so on, but this one was a new artist that came in, so that's why I really like this event. I think that it just executes on the raid concept in a fun way. The boss Sabnok was very satisfying as well. I'll read the event preview there. Do you like songs? If so, you must come see us. I'm Elias of the Harmonia Choir, and we'll sing a mini song for you, but make it fast. I don't know how much longer my voice will last. Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Resplendent Refrain, please come hear our songs. So the preview, I think, doesn't even do it justice. It was a pretty emotionally moving event, and besides that, introduced some adorable recurring characters, right? We got Pia in this event. We also got Vixel, that voice on Vixel, the English voice. It's just chef's kiss, it's a really good voice. And Lucretia likewise was in this event, and the energy mechanic was introduced at this time. So overall, Resplendent Refrain, and how could I forget Meridimus in the background there? Had to mention Meridimus. This was a really fun one for me. So next up, we have number 5, another raid event, Doomsday Getaway. And if Loyalty's Requiem and Resplendent Refrain, released in the first 3 or so months of Dragalia Lost, represented what was possible with the game, and did some things that at the time felt very novel to me, well, I think Doomsday Getaway is kind of like the maximalist peak of raid events in Dragalia Lost. This was a ridiculously cool stylistic event that not only featured an amazing original soundtrack and song and theme, but even when you started this event, there was a unique video, and this event being sort of heavily inspired, I guess, by the Danganronpa series. That's to the best of my knowledge, because I'm not that familiar with that series. It's essentially a murder mystery summer event where every single day a new chapter of the story released, and if you wanted to see who the culprit was or what the conclusion of the story was, you wanted to log in every day and play this in real time. Now, I must say, at the time this released, I wasn't the biggest fan of this event, but in retrospect, I kind of appreciate how important this was. This was a really, really cool event, I think a big deal in the community, and the thing that made me a little salty about it, perhaps, was unfortunately, I was not able to play through it day by day, so I tried to take in the story all at once. Subsequently, reading that story over time, I think it just makes the event work on so many levels, and again, the song associated with this event was so good. You have to hear it. I will post a link to the songs that I can tied to these events in the description below, and also post a link to the wiki if you want to read along with the story on any of these events. But as far as the preview for this one, seeking respite on a remote tropical island, the prince and his allies quickly become entangled in the macabre scheme of a fiend who delights in devouring souls. Each day, they awaken to find another friend's life cut short, and as their hunt for the culprit grows more desperate, they began to suspect the killer may walk amongst them. In this devilish game, the pieces are their very lives. Who will make the final move? Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Doomsday Getaway. All hopes of sun-soaked repose have been dashed upon the rocks. So spooky, such a break from the typical summer event, right? If there's one criticism I have about this event that remains, I'm pretty sure this is the one that confuses a lot of players, because the boss locks out your player-controlled character and you immediately switch to the next character in your roster. So you needed to plan your team accordingly. It wasn't really that big a deal, but they get trapped in a doll, your first character. So very flavorful for the themes of the event, but one that I remember being a point of confusion at times. Anyway, let's move on to our next event on our list, number 4, Fortune from Afar. Another raid event, the full name being New Year's Tidings, Fortune from Afar. It's New Year's Eve and everyone is busy, and that's before a girl from the east shows up at the Halidom with chaos in her wake. Throw in a Pax-bound samurai and a battle for the blessings of a curious dragon, and you've got a recipe for an unforgettable event. Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, New Year's Tidings, Fortune from Afar. Now this is how you kick off a new year. So this event, there's so much to say, right? This was, again, another pretty early event. It was our first ever New Year's raid event. And we got several more after that. And those were fun too. But I think there's just something very special about this time in the game's lifespan. And also the whole concept of Zodiac characters being introduced. It is something taken from other Cygames properties, so if you were familiar with those, it may have not been brand new to you. But at least to me, the idea that every year we could look forward to a special seasonal character and some of their retainers, at the time, those being at a lower rarity to make them more easy to actually summon and have access to, that was something really cool to think about. And the fact that this event properly introduced Hinamoto as another island, country, continent, I don't know if it's quite a continent, but another place in Dragalia Lost besides the main part of the world, that was just something really novel. It expanded the lore, expanded the horizons of Dragalia Lost. Of course, in this event, Ieyasu, Addis, Sazanka, and Botan are visiting from abroad. Shishimai is there as well to spread holiday cheer. And the event's definitely on the more lighthearted side. I think Botan actually carries pretty hard in this event, and her humor, her dialogue, her childhood connection with Ieyasu, there's enough emotion to cut through the humor. And it's just one that is very well balanced. The boss fight also introduced some new mechanics, like with Shishimai, instead of just taking down the boss as quickly as possible, there was a reward element. There was a little bit of divisiveness around this, as some players would, quit the match or get upset depending on what other players were doing in this setting. But ideally, you were able to destroy a gift box on the boss and get extra rewards. And you could do that a couple times to potentially get even rare drops. Also around this time, we got some lucky letters, not exactly this event, but a sort of separate one, a minor one, where we could also get some rare items and prizes. So I think that just the whole celebration collectively around this was very, very cool. The units introduced at the time had a new mechanic, bleed. Even the free-to-play unit, Botan, was very strong and had this mechanic, making it feel like it was accessible for everybody. And this was one of the first events where you could play and play and play to your heart's content, and there was an incentive to do so because the drops were really good. You could clear out the blaze unsummons on this event and repeatedly try farm and fish for some special items that were otherwise very hard to obtain. Overall, I think this was just a really great way to kick in that first new year of Dragalia Lost, 2019, back in the day after it released late 2018. So let's move on to our top 3. And coming in at number 3, Dawn of Dragalia. So Dawn of Dragalia is a half anniversary event. 300 years ago, this land was engulfed in a dark age you now know as the Second War of Binding. With each passing day, the Diurnal Empire grew ever more bold in their conquest of this land. Even the principles set forth by the goddess began to crumble under the weight of the chaos, and the other's cruel grip tightened on the world. But then, when the embers of hope were on the verge of sputtering out, a hero rose from the darkness. Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Dawn of Dragalia. In a time of strife and sorrow, a new pact was formed between people and dragons. So I have to admit, I feel like I forgot to read at least one of these story summaries or previews, so apologies if that was the case, but hopefully everything was on screen long enough for you to be able to read it yourself. I'm going to keep carrying forward, talking about Dawn of Dragalia. This one was a very fun one. For me, one of the biggest things that got me excited about Dragalia Lost back in the day, even before the game came out, was the idea of its lore, the idea that there's a storied history to this world of humans and dragons. It hasn't always been the way that it is when we first encounter it in the present, with our quest focused on Yudin, the seventh scion of the Halidom, all the royal siblings, and the other world Zethia. In fact, it was very different 1,000 years ago, where we learn of a first war of binding taking place, and even 300 years ago, where a second war of binding took place. And it was in that second war of binding that a hero emerged named Alberius, and the kingdom of Alberia that we know in the present being the namesake of this very hero, one who befriended dragons, had the ability to form multiple pacts, had mastery over multiple elements, right? It's just a storied character that we finally got to see in action in this event. This is the introduction of Alberius, the founder king of Dragalia Lost world, essentially. And that to me was what made this so special and so exciting. Like, Alberius is a character I was very curious about, not to be confused with Aurelius, although nowadays apparently I interchange those names too much, but Aurelius, of course, is Yudin's father. Alberius is Yudin's ancestor. Well, in a manner of speaking, let's just say Yudin's ancestor, right? But the thing that actually caught me off guard in this event was Humanoid Midgard-Sormr. And Humanoid Midgard-Sormr, who's in the artwork there, Elysium was also in this event, but Humanoid Midgard-Sormr, this event focused so much on the bond between Midgard-Sormr and Alberius. There's this kind of like bromance to their companionship that was just very, very appealing and wholesome and like feel good, and it gave a lot more depth of character to Midgard-Sormr in ways that we hadn't gotten before. So a character who is with us since the beginning, but one, like many of the Great Worms, other than Mim, I guess, that we just didn't get a chance to know very well on a deeper level. This event provided that. This event provided a lot of context on the Blood Casket, a forbidden technique that Alberius unleashed, apparently learned or borrowed from the Fairy Kingdom that we'd heard about in the main campaign. We even got Chthonius in this event, the forgotten Great Worm that helped Alberius and was actually pretty central to Alberius as kind of like his preferred dragon in a way. So overall, I think this was just a special one. It was the half anniversary, and it was just very, very fun. The raid boss itself had some summons, which was pretty new, although you couldn't hurt the raid boss while the summons were out, which was a little bit trifling at times. But all in all, Humanoid Midgard-Sormr being such a fantastic adventurer to give to all players for free. And sadly, this one being a rare anniversary type event that wasn't added to the event compendium, believe it or not. So yeah, this one, if you had a chance to play it, I'd love to know your thoughts on it. Personally, it's way up there for me. So moving on to number 2 on our list. You may know the last few at this point, although maybe not. There have been a lot of anniversaries in the game. But here I have at number 2, Forgotten Truths. This was the 2nd anniversary raid event. Ushered through a doorway on the precipice of reality, Zethia finds herself cast back 1,000 years before her time. Ilia, the Holy Worm, the very concept of Dragalia. History is oft painted by a brush tinged with the will of those with the strength to take it up. Though the very foundation of her beliefs will be shattered, Zethia must still fight to defend both past and present. The correct door will only open for those who make a bold choice. Will such sage advice from her goddess save her? Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Forgotten Truths. The key of truth is in your grasp, but how will you wield it? So once again, another special raid event, this time, like I said, tied to the 2nd anniversary of Dragalia Lost. Forgotten Truths is almost a perfect event in my opinion. It is a really, really fun, dynamic raid event with a cinematic boss battle against Morsayati, a compelling story in which Zethia goes back in time to teach us all and let us have a window teach us all about the first War of Binding. So this was 1,000 years ago before the main events of the storyline, but her going back actually ushers into motion a lot of important story elements. And so I think this is one of the first events that really had big ties to what was going to transpire in the main campaign, whether we knew it or not at the time. It gave Zethia the knowledge of what really happened in the past, the bond between Ilia and Elysium, the Ilian faith, what was really behind it all. And the thing about Dragalia Lost is it's actually in a post-apocalyptic world in the present, and so 1,000 years ago was an era of advanced technology and alchemy, and a world unlike any that we'd seen in the present, where humans were at war with dragons, and there was a big conflict, and Ilia was trying to prevent some of that conflict through the connection that she had with Midgard-Sormr, through an interesting, enigmatic figure that she met known as Mordecai, and alongside her fairy godmother, in a sense, or her fairy mom, in a sense, Mine, a character also introduced in this event. I think this is just probably a high point as far as Dragalia Lost, like size of the fan base, engagement with it. I just remember the sheer spectacle of this event, to the point that they actually took the Morsayati battle out of this and put it as its own permanent content in the game because it was so cool, and they wanted to make it available to players all the time. I think even before the event compendium was really a thing, or this was added to it, I'm pretty sure that Morsayati Reckoning trial was added as well. So yeah, this is one I'll look back fondly on. And when I say like near perfect, even the regular boss battle was not just the generic enemy. That's one of the small criticisms I have of many of the raid events, was like, you have a raid battle, which is sweet. You also have a regular boss battle in these events. Sometimes it's a cool, unique battle, like against Ieyasu or something. In this case, Forgotten Truths, it was against Zephyr, which at least fit with the story and was kind of special and kind of interesting. Not anything too impressive, but it wasn't like a random Cyclops, which seems to be the recurring boss that we'd often fight. So from the regular boss battle to the battle against Morsayati, I think this one just had a lot going for it. You could use any element that you preferred in this content, which was also really cool to mix and match the characters that you wanted to utilize to take on the boss. And I think that this one, again, pushed back, at least at the time of release, and was a genuine challenge, and so was Morsayati Reckoning when that spin-off released for this. So overall, Forgotten Truths has a healthy spot at number 2, but that leaves only one more event on my top 10 list, and of course, that is none other than Fractured Futures, the first anniversary raid event in 2019. On that fateful day, a loved one was lost and a possible future stolen forever. If only it were possible to rewind time. These thoughts occupy the prince as he is troubled by memories of bygone days. One day, a mysterious dragon appears and offers a chance to set things right. Causality be damned. This seemingly auspicious encounter will make the gears of fate grind most fearsomely. Coming soon to Dragalia Lost, Fractured Futures. Is the past truly written? Or... yeah, this is my favorite event in Dragalia Lost, personally. I would have to say, I do think Forgotten Truths a little bit better story, but Fractured Futures is like my favorite gameplay, and for me that just edges out Forgotten Truths, a fight against Kronos and Kronos Nyx, which I feel like was almost equally cinematic and in its spectacle, especially at the time. There were mechanics that froze things on screen, that changed the whole ground of the arena when Kronos Nyx would try summon a meteor from the sky and there was a weak point that you had to take out. Kronos was another raid boss, so 2 raid bosses in this event, that was a half-screen boss punching over the side of a ledge where your characters could roam about and attack either arm, the boss itself being larger than life, bigger than any other boss we'd ever seen. And then the story of this event was no slouch either. This one focused on Audric. He was a really cool, free playable character. I think one of the strongest free playable characters that we had tied to event up to that point. We also got Parallel Zodiark as a dragon. And the memories I have of this event, of just battling against Kronos Nyx, trying to eke out clears against this really hard boss, and I think the Omega difficulty also being introduced at this time for the very first time, this was just right for me. Whereas Forgotten Truths might have gotten to be a little easy by that point, with this, I remember we were still in like Gen 1 core weapons, limited number of worm prints, maybe not the best dragons, there were no dragon unbinds. It all came down to, can you iframe these crazy multi-element attacks? Technically no element associated with the boss, but multi-element in the motifs, like lightning bolts going across the screen, tornadoes whirling across the screen, ice, fire. It just felt so grand. The level of grandeur in this event is something that I'll remember for a long time. And when it comes to the story, this was a dark story and introduced this idea in Dragalia Lost and, hinted at in other places in the main campaign too. But this idea of multiple timelines or parallel worlds that ended up actually being pretty core to the main narrative all throughout to the final chapters when we start to think about Xenos' strongholds and the extinguishing of possibility. So I think that this, looking back, holds even more significance when I think of it that way. Of course, in this other world that Audric came to us from, Uden was taken over by the other, became a tyrant, fused the Great Worms together. That is sort of the origin story of Kronos, is this dark tyrant Uden that slayed many of his friends and family and was just an evil villain, unlike our main protagonist that we knew and loved. So some of those scenes, like one of not crying or in tears, were very emotionally impactful themselves with this event. And also, I think back on, getting Audric, and we all sort of knew who Audric might be, right? Audric is Uden's dad. It's Aurelius, so sorry for the spoilers. This event is available on a permanent basis in the compendium, but that was definitely hinted at. What I did not expect, which happened much later, is that Audric would be an actual important character in the main campaign, not just a side character. We got Gala Audric, and Audric coming into the story to be able to talk to his children and other characters and kind of be an important voice for them or an important ear for them was something really special too that I think this event sowed the seeds for. All in all though, for me, it's just that Kronos Nyx boss fight. Like, that is what cements this at the top of my list. And ultimately, I think that a lot of these raids had fun gameplay, but the earlier ones especially, it used to be the case that you had to keep up with events, and they were the main difficult thing in Dragalia Lost. There were a few endgame trials, far and few between. They weren't that big a deal. You could clear them at a slow pace. There weren't 20 endgame trials. At the time that Fractured Futures came out, I guess we had all of the Great Worms in their High Dragon form. So we did have those endgame trials, but you just did them weekly, and that was about it, and it was fun, and you were farming up not too strong, not too weak dragon, nothing special. And after this point, with Fractured Futures, Dragalia Lost shifted a lot. We had endgame content that required a lot more farming in order to get the best weapons, and that kind of became the primary way of engaging with the game. Yes, events would happen, and yes, they were fun, but the power spectrum of the player base was such that if you were keeping up with and doing that endgame content, the raid events that released, the facility events, were no longer a challenge for you because you were so overstated. And if you weren't keeping up with that content, well, maybe it was a challenge, maybe not, because in your co-op lobbies, you might have a mix of players of both types. So I think that for me, this is kind of the pinnacle of Dragalia Lost, where these events really meant something. By playing in each one, you would get Twinkling Sands, be able to craft new weapons. Also, in this event in particular, you got a free 5-star core weapon of your choice just by playing the event, which I always thought was super cool. That's ultimately why, all those reasons are why it tops my personal list of top 10 events in Dragalia Lost. Of course, there are many more beloved events. I'm hard-pressed to find a Dragalia Lost event I genuinely disliked. I think all in all, I really liked many of them, and especially because they introduced new characters, new relationships. A lot of them will always have a fondness for me. Kindness in Captivity, that second raid event, just that friendship between Cerise and Melsa was so wholesome. Or Nadine and Linnea's United Front, our first Onslaught event from what I remember. And again, that focus on memories and loss and the connection between those two characters I thought was really special. All these events have a story to tell. And I think that that is something really cool about Dragalia Lost. I guess, barring the very few that don't actually have any story at all. Anyway, I think we'll leave it there. That is going to do it for today, everybody. Let me know what your favorite events are in the comments below. Did I leave anything off? Where is Vagabond Pupper on your personal list of favorite events? Let me know. I'd love to hear it. But like I said before, that is going to do it for today. Just a few late days left of Dragalia Lost. I hope you enjoyed them. Thank you as always for watching. Take care, and I'll see you next time.